Hello everyone, welcome once again to Best Recipes with Sharon. Today we're going to be making a special bread called Ukrainian Easter Paska bread. Pascha is a European Easter bread tradition, and Christian symbolism is associated with this type of bread. So that's why I chose to decorate the top with an Easter lily and the braided cross. The lily symbolizes purity, rebirth, and new beginnings and hope. And it's most often associated with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, as is the cross, of course. And with all that being said, let's get on to making this wonderful celebration bread, because you may want to make this for your Easter celebrations. Now this recipe today makes enough for a couple of mid-sized loaves. Okay, so let's get started with the recipe amounts. Mix a 1/4 cup of butter in a medium-sized saucepan and melt it. Measure out 1/2 cup each of 50/50 cream and 1% milk. Turn off the heat on the stove and add the milk and the cream to the melted butter. And remove it from the heat and let it cool to lukewarm. Pour 1 cup of white sugar into the mixing bowl. Add your lukewarm milk mixture. And the temperature is important so that the yeast will be active. Then crack open 3 large eggs and add that to your mixture. Add 2 tablespoons of quick rise yeast, and this will help reduce the amount of time that it takes for the dough to rise. Now add 1 teaspoon of salt, and then add 2 tablespoons of sour cream, and a generous 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. Then add 2 cups of all-purpose white flour. Mix that in until it's well incorporated, and it starts to look nice and smooth, and still a little bit runny. And cover it with some saran wrap, and this is the first stage of proofing. Let it sit in a warm place for 1 hour. And this time will allow the yeast to ferment the dough and produce gases, which is a process called leavening. Now add about another cup of all-purpose flour, and we'll mix that in until it forms a dough. And then you add a little bit more flour if you need it. So the measurements of the flour are going to vary here. So you just keep adding a little bit more if you need it. But at this point, while the dough is still sticky, I add in about 1 cup of raisins. And be careful how much you mix it now so that you don't squish the raisins. And then you'll need to add a little bit more flour, just a little bit at a time, until you get the dough to the consistency that you need it so that you can put it out onto the counter and knead it a little bit. Don't overdo the flour, just enough to make it stick together and be a tiny bit tacky still. And so you'll just knead it enough so that the dough holds together and the raisins are well incorporated. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. And here I'm just using a little canola oil to grease the inside of my mixing bowl so that I can put the dough in it and let it rise. So here I'm just making sure that the dough has oil on all sides. And this is just to make sure it doesn't stick to the bowl or dry out. And I cover it with a towel and let it rise for its second proofing. It needs to be in a warm place, and let it rise for another hour. Then prepare your pans by greasing it. Put parchment paper in the bottom if you want to, but you really don't have to. And now you flour the countertop and you're ready to shape your loaves. It looks like the dough has rose up quite nicely. Use 2 round pans, a medium and a small, and then I take the dough and shape it into those 2 loaves, leaving a little extra for the decorations that I want to do on top. When you place your dough in the pans like this, make sure that they're about 2 inches thick. You don't want them too thick or they won't cook through properly. And don't forget it needs to rise again. And also remember that when you're doing your decorations, they need to be as thin as possible as well. So there's how to make the braided cross. Now on to making the Easter lily. And so this bread allows you to show your artistic side. And it's kind of nice that it has symbolic symbols as well. Alright, now it's time to let it rise again. And yes, it does have to rise for the 3rd proofing, but at least it's only an hour at a time. Some Pascha breads, it's 2 hours at a time. Once it's ready to bake, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. And it would have rose to probably close to double in size. And this cross looks like it's a little thicker than I intended it to be, but it is the larger loaf and it will take a little longer to bake as well. I'm going to set my timer for about 15 minutes, and that's for the sake of the lily because I want to finish decorating the inside of the lily and I don't want it to burn, so I only want that part to bake for the last half of the baking. That loaf will probably only take about a total of maybe 30 minutes. The larger loaf might take 35 to 40 minutes to completely bake through. Here I'm making the pistil and the stigmas for the inside of the lily. I want it to look fairly detailed. So I'm having some fun with this. After it's baked about 15 minutes, I pulled this one out and added the inside parts of the lily, and then placed it back in the oven to finish its baking. And I did place a little tin foil on the top of each of these loaves so that it wouldn't brown on the top too much before baking through. While the loaves are still hot, I take and grease the top with some butter. Now this celebration bread is a sweet bread, and it's especially good fresh out of the oven. And it's best used up in the same day or two after making it, but I quite like it when it's toasted as well. It warms it up and makes it taste like it had just come out of the oven. You know, this bread is really quite easy to make. The hardest part of it is just waiting for it to rise. Your mixer does most of the work for you otherwise. So give it a try. It's well worth it. You can take a little bit of icing sugar and pour some milk in it to make a glaze and make it the consistency that you want it to be. So make it just thick enough that it will stick to the sides, and you can drizzle it down the sides and it'll stay there. If it's too thin, it'll just run right off. So just keep thickening it until you get it to the consistency that you think would work well. And yeah, I don't get too fancy with it. I put it in a Ziploc bag, cut a hole in the one corner, and then just drizzle it around the sides of your loaf like this. Glazing it is optional. You can do that if you want, or just leave it plain and serve it like it is. Either ways, it's quite a treat. So I'd like to say Happy Easter to everyone. And if you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Thank you for subscribing, and don't forget to comment in the comment section. And until next time, happy eating.